Hi, everyone. This is a pleasure to be here and be part of the conversation. Also, shout out to Boston. While I'm very much a Michigan-rooted person, I did live in Boston for a few years in my 20s, and I don't know, maybe you guys are all over the place right now, but I just want to, I have like very fond memories of the time in that area. So I do have um, a little bit of a story I can share about some of the issues that we see come up in the Flint water crisis, and why it has implications for communities all over the country and beyond, really. I'm going to share my screen to so you can see kind of a PowerPoint, which I'm going to do a very speedy run through, and we will talk more about it in a moment. So let me see if I can get this right. Let's see. Okay. Just to pan out for a minute, we're talking about Michigan here. And if folks, I don't know if folks have visited the Great Lakes, but they are extraordinary, right? They hold more than 1/5 of all the fresh water on the face of the earth. They have gifted us more coastline than any other state except Alaska. They're pivotal for our economic, our recreation, our drinking water. That's a picture of little Anna on Lake Michigan, where she grew up. It's a big part of our emotional life, our psychic life, and it's part of what makes it especially haunting that we've also become home to one of the most well-known drinking water crises ever, right, in memory. Flint is a river town. It's a Great Lakes city. Water, which should be our abundance, our blessing, our responsibility, has here became a threat for people, and not because of a natural disaster, but because of actual choices that people made that caused and prolonged this crisis. This is the day in April of 2014 when there was this ill-fated switch that catalyzed all that came next. Everybody who was at the celebratory press conference sorely regrets it. This is, as you may know, Flint had been getting its water from the Great Lakes through Detroit's water system for more than 50 years. It had, during the key years here, the city had an emergency manager, which meant they had a state-appointed administrator who had full authority for all decisions made in the city. While under that system of governance, the city decided it was going to leave Detroit's water system and join a brand new water system. And that new water system wasn't yet built that was going to serve the region. So for the couple of years until it would be operational, they were going to reboot their old city plant. They're going to treat the water from the Flint River. And then, a couple of years on, they're going to complete the switch to the new system when it's up and running. And everybody celebrated this as like, look at us getting back to our roots, having more local control, et cetera, et cetera. But of course, things went very poorly. A lot of people to this day still believe that the problem with Flint's water is because it was sourced from the Flint River, which has a history of very bad pollution. And this isn't quite the case, though of course there is some truth in it. The Flint River, like waterways all over the country, had been treated like open sewers. People learned to not drink from it, swim in it, eat the fish you catch from it. There was no limits on what you could dump into water or how much of it you could dump into it until the 1970s, right? So peak industrial era for, especially for Flint, the birthplace of General Motors. So the river did take quite a beating, but the good news is that clean water laws and frankly disinvestment, the fact that there's fewer polluting factories, have given the river some time to heal, along with some water keepers, volunteer groups and so on that are helping it out. And the river is much cleaner now than it's ever been in a very long time. Of course, what happened was when we got to the treatment plant, which did not get the staffing nor the resources necessary to treat a complex water source properly. And one of the key issues, of course, is that it wasn't treated with something called corrosion control, which you add to the water at the treatment plant to keep it from corroding what is almost universally very old infrastructure that our drinking water systems are based on. especially important because some of that aging infrastructure is made out of lead, one of the world's best known neurotoxins. Now, this is not a perfect solution. Even when we treat our water properly with corrosion control, lead and other contaminants can still leach into the water. We do need to be proactive about replacing our infrastructure in our communities all over the country, but not adding it to the water was breaking the law, and it would have helped. It would have helped. And as a result, this is what ends up happening to the pipes, right? They literally start breaking down. And the longer that people were ignored in their concerns about the water, the worse this was getting. So when you saw images of people holding up brown water or orange water, that was, of course, corroded iron. You could not see the lead, though that was what was most damaging. You couldn't see a lot of the bacteria. That was also causing a lot of problems. There was E. coli outbreaks. There was a 2-year outbreak of Legionnaire's disease caused by the waterborne bacteria that is what ended up actually killing people. This wasn't even made public until after the fact. And there was also a problem with too much of a disinfection byproduct that can cause cancer and was violating Safe Drinking Water Act laws. So there's a series of problems, all, cascading one upon another. And this is what leads us to a point where a Great Lakes city, a river town, learns that its own water is a threat. And I cannot emphasize enough how much of a betrayal this is. It's not just complicating your ability to have a glass of tap water at the dinner table. It affects your ability to, you have to think about it every morning when you try to make coffee, when you're making ice cubes, when you're making formula that you feed your baby. You think back on all the times you warned your children to drink water instead of soda, trying to help them be healthier. And then you find out that it's toxic, that it was hurting them. It's incredible. The ability to take showers and baths, the Legionella bacteria, you inhale it through steam, right? I knew one health worker in Flint. She kept a crock pot in her bathroom where she would heat bottled water, pour it into the tub, and bathe that way. A lot of churches were beginning to do baptisms outside of town. I mean, it affects every part of your life. And one thing I would do in the book that I'm gonna kind of swim right through here, but I do want to acknowledge it, is that I think it's important to connect what happened with the Flint water crisis with the larger history of infrastructure inequality in this country, and how we very purposefully built separate and unequal cities in a way that and we are still dealing with the self-perpetuating momentum of that. It very directly influenced what made Flint vulnerable in the first place to chronic disinvestment and emergency management and so on. And it literally made this water crisis worse. So of course, there's a history of segregation, redlining, restrictive covenants, racist housing policies that were, dooming people of color to poor quality infrastructure, right? Putting people on the front lines for a lot of the burdens of pollution and disinvestment. Now, Flint has a history of community organizing, going back to that sit-down strike in the 1930s that catalyzed the labor movement that transformed the 20th century. You could see that playing out in the 60s with the pushing back against the segregation. You could also see it in more recent years with the water activists who were doing everything they could think of to be seen well before the world was paying attention to them. I think it's also important to acknowledge the fact that this water system is designed to support a city that has twice as many residents as it has today, and also a huge industrial sector, right? So Flint hooked on to Detroit's system in the first place to sustain ever-growing population and economic development back in the 60s. It was incredible. It had been booming for like 50 plus years, and its population only started declining as marked by the census in 1970. So in the wake of fair housing laws, school desegregation laws, the rise of a circle of suburbs that were able to grow precisely because they hooked onto Flint's water system. In other words, Flint sort of accidentally subsidized its own disinvestment in many ways. You can see how the people who started leaving Flint were the white people, you know, and we're creating this situation, which we see all over the country, where you have a hollowed out center of poor people and people of color who are surrounded by a widening circle of relative wealth and prosperity, and that has very clear racial dynamics here. And so if you go to Flint today, you'll see beautiful historic homes. You'll see like lovely, some denser neighborhoods. There's really wonderful people in town who are doing all kinds of interesting things to rebuild the city in inclusive, equitable, beautiful ways. But you also see the remains of all the people who left, right? It's like a ghost looming over you all the time. I live in Detroit. It's very similar here. And this vacancy means that you had a water crisis before the water crisis, right? With people paying the most expensive water bills in the nation, among the most very expensive in the nation, even before you account for the fact that 40% of the people live in poverty, which led to a spate of shutoffs, which led to a spate of illegal hookups, which led to a spate of people being prosecuted for water theft. It was a real issue. And even at those high rates people were being charged, that couldn't sustain this gigantic water system, which was losing at least a third of its water just through leaks. Which made the cost even more expensive. You couldn't even maintain the basics, let alone deal with the fact that you had lead built into it. This made the water crisis worse too, because water that sits still in pipes for any period of time or moves very slowly through it has more time to get saturated with contaminants that are breaking down from the pipes, right? So if you live in this neighborhood that's a little more dense, that is historically a white neighborhood, you will the water's still moving back and forth at a pretty quick clip. And while everybody in town is a victim of this water crisis, as well as commuters and college students and others who are chronically exposed to this toxic water for a very long time, the people who lived in this neighborhood would be more likely to see their water be discolored. They would be more likely to experience problems with their water sooner, because the water is covering vacant ground and moving more slowly and sitting stagnant. It's getting saturated, right? So our history of white flight, basically, and just the chronic disinvestment of the city of Flint didn't just cause the precarious conditions of concentrated poverty that are always a problem. That is always a problem, and made the city vulnerable. It exacerbated the effects of the poisoning that happened through this water crisis. And finally, yeah, like as we heard just a bit ago, lead's everywhere. It's all terrible. It's all poison. We really do need a multifaceted effort to reckon with it in our society. And I do think sometimes, like, people who are concerned about paint, or people who are concerned about the legacy of leaded fuel that's still in our soil, or people are concerned about water, they're sometimes pitted against each other. Like, you have to choose one or the other to care about. That if you pay attention to one, it's like you're ignoring the other. Really, we need a multifaceted reckoning with this toxic metal that's so many of us have been exposed to. And finally, I just want to say that, like, even what happened in Flint is also, not even really novel in many ways. It's something we've known for a long time. We've known it's toxic for a long time, even if we had different definitions of what lead poisoning meant. This is from the early 1950s in Baltimore, where people were trying to pinpoint where lead poisoning was playing out. And you could see in that subhead, most cases in slum areas. With what we've been dealing in recent years with Flint, what was kind of revealed through then, not even a new story. and at some point we need to deal with the root causes if we're going to like come up with a better outcome for ourselves, our families, our communities, and our children. And I'll end there. Thank you.